After making my last two videos, I decided to make another video here regarding information related to those videos. This is kind of just like notes on the military intelligence unit in Dallas, the 112th group, and on Steve Weiss being Fletcher Prouty. This is a document from March 17th, 1997, ARRB. This is the latest document I could find relating specifically to Steve Weiss. This was after Steve Weiss had decided not to talk anymore, that I covered in my last video. And what it looks like to me is that this is by Timothy Ray. It looks like he came up with questions to ask Steve Weiss after he realized they were never going to talk to him, which makes these very safe questions to formulate. Anyway, the ones that I'm noting here, 2A, how did Dallas office hear that president had been shot? What was response? The reason I think this is important is because Edward Coyle said that Powell had called the office and Steve Weiss had answered the phone, and Steve Weiss, in the first statement, the only one we have from him, didn't mention that. And so it looks like Timothy Ray is planning to get to the bottom of that after he knows he's not going to be talking to Steve Weiss. That's the way I see that. And C there is kind of related, any knowledge of experiences of Powell Coyle at TSPD. Now, Coyle had told the ARRB twice that he and Steve Weiss had run down to the Texas School Book Depository with a camera that Powell had asked for, and Weiss didn't mention anything about that. So it looks like Timothy Ray is covering his ass here by pretending that he's going to be asking this very pertinent question, which of course was never asked, at least according to the documents as I have them. And then the next one here is 3E. And the last one I'm dealing with here. Prouty allegations, in effect, that the 112th ordinarily would automatically have provided security, and that this did not occur during the trip to Dallas because Secret Service specifically told 112th agents to stand down. Assessment? I think this is kind of a wink and a nod. I think probably Timothy Ray knows damn well who Steve Weiss is, and that it's Fletcher Prouty himself. And here, this is to make it look as though Steve Weiss is not Fletcher Prouty, or if he is, that Timothy Ray doesn't know that. That's the way it looks to me. So I'm not a fan of Timothy Ray anymore, and he is an army man himself. So that's that. And now I want to deal with Wilson Pate, or Wilson Page actually. James Powell had told Timothy Ray that it was Wilson Page from my office came down and identified me and they let me go. So he's saying that Wilson Page came to get him out of the Texas School Book Depository. This contradicts what Edward Coyle later said, which was that he himself, Edward Coyle, and Steve Weiss, along with Jack Reville, had got Powell out of the building. But Powell said it was Wilson Page. And he's very sure about this, because later in an interview, Timothy Ray says, now Wilson Pate from your unit came. And Powell corrects him and says Page. So one might argue that Powell was confusing Pate with the colonel in charge at the 112th office, which was a Page, or which was a Pate. Well, I forget his first name right now. But no, Powell says Page. It's definitely Page, Wilson Page, and Wilson is not that colonel's first name. So Powell names a specific person, Wilson Page, who came to get him out of the building. And apparently the ARRB did its due diligence and tried to contact Wilson Page, but they discovered that Wilson Page had died in 1985 which was 11 years before Powell talked to the ARRB. So Wilson Page was no longer alive and therefore not able to corroborate or to contradict what Powell said. And I think Powell probably knew that when he testified or when he talked to the ARRB. And in the last paragraph, it says Page, and they're talking about his widow here. Page said both Wilson and her, or she, were in Japan at the time of the assassination. So according to the widow, her husband, Wilson Page, the man that Powell said got him out of the Texas School Book Depository, was on the other side of the planet at the time. And I think that's significant. I mean, I concluded already that Powell was lying about Wilson Page. And I think this confirms it. And if we look at the roster for Region 2, which is the Dallas office, this was as of December 31st, 1963. There's no Wilson Page on the list either. There's Roy H. Pate. He's the commanding colonel at the office. But he didn't go to the Texas School Book Depository. So there's no reason to think Wilson Page, who apparently was in Japan, got Powell out of the building. But Powell lied about that because he didn't want us to know that he had been brought a camera by Ed Coyle and Steve Weiss. I think this probably comes from the HSCA. You can see it does come from the National Archives. I forget where I got it or what it's a part of, but when I saw it, I thought it was significant. So I saved it. It has to do with the Military Intelligence Region 2 in Dallas. And it says, what is Aggressive Counterintelligence Program? Region 2 Dallas. As a result of Cuban Missile Crisis, intensified liaison with federal and local agencies, recruited 30 people as potential sources, with at least one source in each sensitive organization within jurisdiction. Wrote detailed directive listing agencies, naming contacts, carded and filed. So I don't know what this is based on exactly, but it's an official government document that says some aggressive counterintelligence program was going on as a result of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was in 1962. For me, this brings to mind what motorcycle Dallas police officer James Taylor apparently had told somebody, because it's in his obituary. He proudly served his country in the U.S. Army during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, James Taylor was already a Dallas police officer. So he wasn't in the Army, but if the Army was conducting this special intensified program in Dallas, in the Dallas office, as that previous document said, then this intensive program might have included the assassination of President Kennedy, and James Taylor did provide the open mic radio interference on the Dallas Police Channel 1 during the assassination, according to my conclusion anyway, though the rest of the world doesn't seem to recognize that yet. But James Taylor was involved in the assassination. He was a Dallas police officer, and in his obituary it says he proudly served his country during the Cuban Missile Crisis, even though he was already a Dallas police officer. So the only way he could do that, I think, is if he was secretly part of this Army intelligence operation to murder the president. And then there's this thing, which comes from the 112th INTC Group Unit History, 1962 to 1963, a PDF file I have that I have downloaded. I'm just going to read the middle paragraph there. Possibly the most significant military event during 1963 was a visit to Region 2 in February by Major General Garrison B. Coverdale, Chief U.S. Army Intelligence Corps. General Coverdale arrived in Dallas, Texas on 18 February 1963, inspected the region office in Dallas, and was given a formal briefing on that date of the administrative and operational activities of Region 2 by the region commander and the operations officer. The chief spoke individually and collectively to each military and civilian member of the Dallas office of Region 2. On the evening of 18 February, General and Mrs. Coverdale were honored by the officers of the region at a party in the home of the region commander. Also present at the party were Special Agent in Charge, Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, Dallas, Texas, the Chief of Police, Dallas Police Department, the Agent in Charge, Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, Dallas, Texas, the Commanding Officer, Office of Special Investigations, OSI, Carswell Air Force Base, and several high-ranking USAR intelligence officers. And this is a photograph of General Coverdale, front and center, at the U.S. Army Intelligence Center in 1962. He's the guy wearing the glasses and smiling. Well, I guess there's more than one doing that, but he's the one in the middle in uniform. And General Coverdale reminds me of General Lansdale. I guess it must be the name and the fact that they're both generals. And General Lansdale is famously identified by Fletcher Prouty, who I say is Steve Weiss, as this person here with the three tramps, or two of the three tramps. This is a famous thing in the JFK assassination world, where Fletcher Prouty said that was General Lansdale. However, in my opinion, it could just as easily be General Coverdale. In fact, the guy in the photograph in Dealey Plaza is wearing eyeglasses, and General Coverdale is wearing eyeglasses in his 1962 photo. And the photographs of General Lansdale never have him wearing eyeglasses. Now, presumably he would wear glasses to read, as most people his age would. And, of course, anyone could wear sunglasses. But it seems to me that, of course, it's a ridiculous idea in the first place to say, oh, there's General Lansdale, when you get a picture of the back of him like that. But remember, that identification comes from Fletcher Prouty, who is a disinformation agent, at least, and I think who was Steve Weiss. And I think probably it's Coverdale, and that Prouty knew it was Coverdale, and that he said Lansdale just to put us off track. Of course, I can't prove that. And this is from one of Edward Coyle's ARRB interviews. Coyle explained that his actions on that day were business as usual, except for the fact that he wanted to see JFK up close. He said his group had an extremely good relationship with the Dallas Police Department, partly because a large number of the Vice and Intelligence Squad members were Army reservists, and his group did security background checks on them. So we have lots of indications from all over the place that this military office had a close relationship with the Dallas Police Department. And I think that's consistent with what I've just said earlier in this video about James Taylor and other Dallas police officers certainly were involved with the Assassination Day events, including Sergeant Gerald Hill, who was on temporary assignment in the personnel department doing background checks, exactly what the military office did routinely. So it wouldn't be surprising at all if the military intelligence office had a direct relationship with Sergeant Gerald Hill. And again, back to the Coyle interview. Coyle told me I needed to realize that routine meetings were held for senior law enforcement and intelligence personnel in the Dallas area on a monthly basis. Prior to the routine meeting before JFK's visit, people in Coyle's office figured they would be needed to help out with security or with something. When their supervisor returned from the meeting, he told them that during the portion regarding JFK's visit, a guy from the Secret Service, whose name he didn't remember, stood up and said, "We don't need the FBI, the OSI, the ONI, the CIC, or any other groups for this thing. Between the Dallas Police Department and us, we have everything under control." Coyle said that his group was very surprised to hear this, but we figured we just weren't needed. And according to Coyle from this call report, his supervisor was Steve Weiss, Lieutenant Steve Weiss. And from the one Weiss conversation we have, there's this: an agent in charge named possibly Sauer, probably Forrest Sorrells of the Secret Service, allegedly said, "No, we don't need any assistance from anyone. Both of us and the Texas Department of Public Safety will handle everything." So we have on top here the Coyle account of what Steve Weiss said about the meeting with the Secret Service, with Forrest Sorrells, and we have the Steve Weiss account of what was said by Sorrells. And the only difference is, in the Steve Weiss account, the Texas Department of Public Safety was inserted instead of the Dallas Police Department. So, as I think Steve Weiss is Fletcher Prouty, a disinformation agent, I think Fletcher Prouty, Steve Weiss, knows that the Dallas police were heavily involved in the assassination, and therefore he says Texas Department of Public Safety instead of Dallas Police because he wants us to be put off that trail of the Dallas police. Now, I don't think this is a serious tactic, but I think that's the way his mind works, that he wanted to say it was somebody other than the Dallas police. And Steve Weiss, as Ed Coyle's supervisor, wrote up a report on Ed Coyle, an evaluation, very positive. And, of course, Steve Weiss signed the document, too. And here on the top right, I have inserted Fletcher Prouty's signature. Now, of course, these are two different names, and there are differences in style. The Steve Weiss signature leans consistently to the right, whereas Fletcher Prouty's stands up straight and even leans back to the left a little. But other than that, there's a very strong stylistic similarity, I think, in the way the swirls go around the top. In Stephen Weiss, I don't even know what that swirl is for. I guess it's crossing the T in Stephen. In fact, there's a very similar cross to the T in Fletcher, even though it's a lot smaller. So I take this as more corroboration that I'm right, that Steve Weiss is actually Fletcher Prouty. And now going to the Army Intelligence, or one of the Army Intelligence Group's communications cables. I mentioned this in my last video, and I've neglected to mention something. Where the redactions occur, I just assumed in my narration that the redacted names were the same as the name that ends the paragraph, which is Mamontov, or Mamontov. I can't say that right for some reason. Mamontov. I think, however, that Peter Paul Gregory fits better in this space than Ilya Mamontov. And in the long one, it's probably the full name, Peter Paul Gregory, and the second one probably just says Gregory. And I think probably that last line was added without a redaction to make us think what it is I thought when I was narrating the video. That is that the redacted name is Mamontov, when really, probably, I think the redacted name is Gregory. And probably this was done to put us off the notion that Peter Paul Gregory was an operative of U.S. intelligence. And this is Peter Paul Gregory talking to Marina with the Secret Service later. This was not denied that he did this. But I think that this initial report here, which comes from the day of the assassination, they probably didn't want it looking like they were turning immediately to Peter Paul Gregory. And therefore, I think that sentence was added to make us think, oh, that's the redacted name there, Mamontov. But I don't know. And I also talked about this Army intelligence cable. And this is the one that details the two people, I say up on the overpass, who were sighting in a rifle down to Elm Street that the Dallas police supposedly came and shoot away. And actually, the FBI apparently investigated this from this document here. On November 27th, 1963, N.T. Dolly Fisher, Deputy Chief, Patrol Division, Dallas, Texas Police Department, advised he was not aware of any information indicating that two unknown men were seen by officers of his department on November 20, 1963, sighting in a rifle near the scene of where the president was assassinated, nor any information these men were sighting in on two silhouette targets, and when police attempted to contact these men, they could not locate them. Fisher, telephonically contacted by Lieutenant Colonel Earl Boyd, Regional Office 112th Intelligence Group, Dallas, Texas, and was advised by him that personnel of his organization had heard on Friday afternoon, November 22, 1963, while at the Dallas Police Department, that the Dallas Police Department had received a call Wednesday night regarding two men sighting in a rifle on Continental Street, which is not near Elm Street. Chief Fisher stated he had no information indicating this was true, and that the following items checked in an effort to substantiate this rumor. However, he could locate no information to substantiate the rumor. Officers returned, so they're calling this a rumor. It's a report by the 112th INTC group, Dallas. And Fisher is calling it a rumor. Officers return sheet on radio calls, IBM listing of radio calls as to location, and dispatcher's call sheet. So apparently there's no hard copy information about this. Chief Fisher then had the officers working the daylight shifts on November 20th, 1963, and November 21st, 1963, contacted in an effort to determine whether or not any of the officers had seen these men and did not report it, since there was no record of anyone calling in to make a complaint. Chief Fisher advised he was unable to locate any officers who had seen anything even resembling this incident. Captain Will Fritz, Homicide Bureau, was contacted concerning the matter and stated he was not aware of such information, and this information had never come to his attention. And my note there is real investigators would have found out that Captain Dowdy is Captain Doty, maybe pronounced Dowdy, but not spelled that way, and then they would have questioned Doty. The FBI did not do this. So, as is typical in this case, the investigators go talk to somebody else about something when they know who the source was and they don't talk to him. And the FBI also failed to talk to the two intelligence agents who are credited with getting this information from Captain Dowdy. Those are Special Agents West and Lanyon. And according to the personnel list, West and Lanyon were genuine 112th Office special agents for the intelligence office. So the FBI here not only did not talk to the primary source of the information, but they didn't talk to the secondary source of the information. They went and talked to somebody else. Well, I'll probably never have another opportunity to mention this information, so here it is. I found something like an obituary for Ken Lanyon, and he's quoted at the bottom as saying, "Few of you know that I happened to be very near the Texas School Book Depository when the shooting took place, and I may have been one of the first 6 or 8 people to enter the building following the shooting, and may well have passed Oswald in the turmoil. Well, we have no official information that this is true, that Lanyon was one of the first 6 or 8 people to enter the building. I mean, he might have been in the office, for all we know, which was 5 blocks away. But it may be just a bullshit story that he made up, but there it is. I want to mention this thing, too. It's from the ARRB, a call report with a Donald Monier, who was an Army intelligence officer who was at the 112th until the end of September. So he left before the assassination, though he might have seen some of the activity leading up to the assassination. They have a call report, which I'm not going to go through, where he apparently was speaking freely about the matter. But when they call him back to try to set up a more detailed interview, it says this here: "It is very important to emphasize that Monier did not back off his statements or retract his story once he learned we wanted to go for a sworn statement. Rather, he just became much more reluctant to discuss it, as if he were worried about letting an important cat out of the bag. I told him that I understood his reticence and that I would discuss his concerns with my superiors before I called him back. And I have no further information on Monier, except I do have the previous interview, which I found nothing terribly interesting in. But it could be the cat he doesn't want to let out of the bag is that aggressive Army intelligence operation that was going on prior to the assassination. But I can only speculate about that. So that's my notes video. I really do think Fletcher Prouty was Steve Weiss, that he was standing with James Powell at the Texas School Book Depository, that he was involved in the assassination. Presumably he knew what he was doing, and that he was a very important organizer of the activities. I can't prove it, of course, but that's what I think.